Hello, this is something quite different. As usual, I'm John Reynolds, Nature Folklore and Nature Echoes, and I'll probably put this video on Nature Echoes for a change. It's actually a recording. And if you're on Facebook, you'll notice I've been posting about this lovely Leitrim project, Amach to the Field, and 21 townlands around Leitrim have put up doors, and on the doors there's phone numbers to phone up, and you listen to the story while you're in the field, and you can actually look around the field. Well, in theory, you look around the field and you can reflect on the stories that's being told to you. So I've been talking about doing this for a few days, and this afternoon I actually got going with it. But there's three challenges that I was in denial of. There's Squeak. There she is. She's trying to... There was three challenges. Well, the first one, really, I think it was distractions. Trying to get out all day, and there's distractions. By the time I got out, it was 4 o'clock. And the second one, some of these doors, they're in the middle of nowhere. And unfortunately, due to disability and not being able to walk far, I didn't know which one of these I'd be restricted to. I do have the rollator, but that was going to be certainly a restriction. I did come across that once a bit today, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but I think I can overcome it tomorrow. But the third one, and it's the biggest one really, is you can't just pass a place and not have a cup of tea. So that's exactly what happened on this first afternoon. The cup of tea took most of the rest of the afternoon away. Anyway, I'm going to make a start. I'm going to start, and I got to two places. To the Field is actually on right until the 29th of October, I think. And I thought, we got fantastic weather day today, tomorrow, Monday and Tuesday. Yeah, 21, I can get 4 or 5 sites in a day, no problem at all. Got 2 in today. And I can imagine that the rest of Leitrim who are going to do this, they're going to start going out and about on the 27th. So they'll leave themselves 1, 2, or maybe 3 days. Anyway, I better get on with this, and I'll get through to the first site, which is this one. I went to Drumgrania, and I think just it says Ridge of the Sun, and that gives you a bit of a clue that the townland. And there's a lovely... That horse was in the field, but it was way away from me. But that's the official photograph for Drumgrania. Unfortunately, when I got there, John Reynolds is a storyteller, Drumgrania. He wasn't there, so his wife Sheila was there, and she came up, and it was as if I was a burglar or something. I suppose I do look horrific to a stranger, but it didn't take long before we actually warmed up, and it ended up we exchanged stories. I mean, John wasn't there, and he's quite a story, but once we got exchanging the stories, we were exchanging stories about butter, about wool, various things exchanging, and it was amazing how sort of childhood, teenage years were very much in common. So we had a lot to talk about, and I was saying, I shouldn't stop for a cup of tea. I'm going to want to get 2 or 3 more places in. Oh, no, that wasn't going to happen. But the one thing, I got to the door. So there we go. We got the door. It's in the middle of the field. Actually, when I arrived, that door was down. So this is kind of staged. Because I looked, she said, oh, it's in the field over there when we first started talking. I couldn't see anything. Oh, the wind must have blown it down, she said. So Sheila, her name, she went into the field and lifted it up. Well, actually, I did help her. I went into the field as well. But we came back out and started again. And it's propped up against the barrel. But the one thing that's missing, each of these doors are supposed to have a phone number on them. And you phone up the phone number and get the story. But unfortunately, there was no phone number. John was out and about. Sheila couldn't get hold of him. So it was left to me and Sheila to exchange stories. And I'm glad it did, because it was a fantastic range of stories that I wouldn't get for John. But when I got home this evening, I got the phone number. So I called up the phone number, and John Reynolds, it's very long storytelling, and I'm going to give you some little tidbits of it, but do visit that door. I was apparently the first one to get there. I thought there would have been a stream of people at the beginning. Of course, obviously that must be number 4 in the list of challenges. But let's show you some pictures first. Here we go. That shows you it's been lifted up, doesn't it? I think that makes a nice bit of artwork. It's been down during the rain and the wind, lift it up, and then you got the bare patch, and there's that barrel that's propping it up. There isn't any wind in the forecast, so that should be all right now. And there's Sheila and a couple of the dogs. I think there was 3 or 4 dogs, but there's 2 of them. Never got the actual dogs' names, but they're woof, 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 and they seem quite aggressive when you get into the farm, but they're just little and big sweethearts. Yeah, and anyway, I got the John Reynolds, and I'll give you some tidbits. I had to write notes because he tells a lot of stories with his spiel. The first thing he starts off with is about his family, and he mentions that on the farm and in the farmhouse, that cottages there, but there's 5 generations that he knows of his family that have been in the same spot. An interesting thing, he talked a bit about his family, but what I found was fascinating, the next transition was in talking about the post office. He actually talked quite a bit about the post office and getting the post. But of course, that was before internet days. People did rely so much on their postman or postwoman coming around to them. So it was really a big issue. So he talked about that. He talked more or less about the land ownership going into the past. He said that the farm that he's on was once part of the holding of the Croftons. The Croftons were huge landowners that went through Longford, went through Leitrim, up into County Sligo. And in fact, there is a Lord Longford's house on the edge of the Ox Mountains, quite near the Ladies' Brae. And there's a beautiful woodland there. And there's a Lady Longford still lives in the mansion there. But Croftons also were very much the Leitrim landowners. Even Lord Leitrim kind of had a bond or a rental after the Croftons. I'm not sure what the arrangement is, but the one thing about the Croftons is they've got beautiful species of apples. And so John Reynolds, he actually talked about the apples, and they did have some successful apple trees growing there. He talked about other local farming names, and he started talking about a local character that's very much a legend in the area, called Beezy. How many places around Ireland is there a Beezy that is a mystic and a storyteller? Well, around this farmland, certainly the case that there was Beezy was around. Drumgrania had Beezy, and certainly some of her storytelling was about the harvest. And some of the families that were around there included the Percivals, the MacDonalds, and the Beattys. And that got me quite interested because the Percivals, they're a Knights Templar family, but he named the first names of the Percivals, and they are typical hand-downs of Percival names, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. Some Percivals ended up in Argyll in Scotland, and when they're in Argyll, they go into close association with the MacDonalds. And of course, the MacDonalds were very much linked with the O'Donnells, which were extension of the Northern O'Neills in Donegal. And the Beattys had quite a reputation of understanding plants and herbs through Argyll. They also were brewers. And I'm doing a series of the Alehouse Wives, so I didn't talk about the Beattys, but they were all part of that. And quite a lot of Percivals actually married in with the MacDonalds and the Beattys. So I wish John was present, because I would love to know how much he would have known about how these families ended up in this particular area, because I'm familiar with the unity of the families in Argyll. He then went into how their family home of 5 generations, how that was built. And then he went back to fruit. He started saying how they got gooseberries that grow very well. And then we went back to talking about Grania. He was comparing about the bog, but he said there was some high ground, and it's very fertile high ground, 20, 30 acres. And so he reckoned there was barley. Well, if there was beetles, brewers, and barley, of course, my mind puts a whole lot together. But he said that there would have been enough to feed a family anyway. So he describes that in quite detail. Then he goes into the property reduction, how the remaining homes in the area tend to be holiday homes, maybe people from Dublin or from the city. And then he talked about a local ring fort. And that's when he got onto the fairy story. So it's worth tuning in to John Reynolds to listen to those fairy stories, which includes stories of the fairy wind, which is something I'm going to cover on Nature Echoes at some point. Oh, that, and then he went on to cures. Of course, you go from the fairies to the cures, and he talks about a local person who had a cure for cowfoot rot. And one of the ingredients was unsalted butter. And John himself, or Sheila was telling me this, that John himself loves to make his own butter. And of course, I like to make butter too. When we have visitors around, I used to make butter for the visitors to go on Claire's scones. So it's worth listening to it to find out the ritual with the butter, because it's not just making the butter. It's what the person with the cure for cowfoot rot, the rituals that went around the butter. Fascinating stuff. Another one that I love about, he talked about how they were forever pulling cows out of the drains, out of the bog drains. And that was a thing when I lived in the Inner Hebrides. The village or the local people were often brought out in the middle of the night to drag cows, and sometimes it'd be just the head sticking up from the bog. But we'd always managed it somehow to get the cow out and pull it with ropes, and even someone would jump into the bog and push its rear end out. So we did, it's familiar. And then everybody had the hip flask with the whiskey, and then we'd share that around, and even share it with a cow. There's a cow who's got the oats bag and gets a bit of whiskey in it. Just some of the daft stuff I suppose you did. Then he went into, because of the butter link, he talked about the dairy farming that used to be in the area, and that is well worth listening to, because it's I learned a lot from this. It's very much explaining a much more sustainable and caring way of getting butter and cream. Just listen to it. It's absolutely wonderful. It's very much a sharing. It's not really depriving the cow. I was absolutely fascinated. I didn't think it was possible, but John, in his story, he shows this was possible, how it happens. What else did he talk about? He explained the bogs. He went into the bogs, and he absolutely loved the time he spent on the bogs. He said that was a farmer's holiday to him. The lads would get out in the bogs or away from the farm. There wasn't any deadlines. It was fairly lazy, he said. It was the farmer's holiday. And they lived on tea and eggs. He says there was always lots of tea and eggs. There was some drinking. There was music. There was a bit of dancing. But he goes on to it. And he also said there was a family that lived on the bog, and that was the center of entertainment. They would all go along when it got dark. Well, it was in May. It wouldn't get dark till late, but it was in May. And they would actually go for the Cailling at this house on the bog. And apparently, and I've heard this in legends, and I've seen it done as well, but the flagstones in this bog cottage actually had a big horse's head. So when they danced, the echo and the acoustics of this horse's head came out. That's only tidbits of what he said. A fascinating story. So do get that one, Drumgrania. I think that's. Have I got anything else? As I say, just before I left, I'll show you the picture again. The dogs were, I don't know, so happy to leave, but they left their goodbye there. So that was my first visit this afternoon, which took a couple of hours with exchanging all the stories. So anyway, this is quite a long video. So I hope you enjoy that.